The morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete courtyard of the Naval Training Center as Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell stepped out of her rental car. She adjusted her civilian clothes, a simple white blouse and dark jeans, feeling oddly exposed without her uniform. After 15 years of military service, including 8 as a Navy SEAL, wearing civilian attire still felt like putting on a costume for a play she never auditioned for. Sarah had been looking forward to this day for months. Her younger brother Jake was graduating from the Naval Academy, and she had taken special leave to attend the ceremony. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was visiting the very institution where her own military journey had begun, though her path had taken her far from these pristine halls into some of the most dangerous corners of the world. She reached into her car to grab her purse and the small gift she'd brought for Jake, a compass that had belonged to their grandfather, a World War II veteran. As she straightened up, she noticed a group of cadets approaching from across the courtyard. Their polished uniforms gleamed in the morning light, and their confident stride suggested they were, probably seniors enjoying the privileges that came with their rank. What Sarah didn't notice was the mischievous glint in their eyes or the way they nudged each other as they spotted her. To them, she looked like just another civilian visitor, probably someone's girlfriend or sister, alone and potentially vulnerable to their idea of harmless fun. The leader of the group was Cadet First Class Tours, a tall, broad-shouldered young man from Texas who had always been popular with his classmates. He had a reputation for elaborate pranks and a silver tongue that could charm his way out of most trouble. Behind him walked his usual crew: David, a quiet but loyal follower from California; James Murphy, an Irish-American from Boston with a quick temper; and a joker from Florida who never met a prank he didn't like. Said in a low voice as they approached Sarah, "I do believe we have a lost lamb in need of our assistance." The others chuckled, understanding the unspoken plan. It was a tradition among certain groups of cadets to playfully harass civilian visitors, especially attractive women, with exaggerated military discipline and mock authority. It was meant to be harmless fun, a way to show off their military bearing while impressing outsiders with their supposed power and importance. Sarah was studying the campus map she'd picked up at the main gate, trying to locate the auditorium where the graduation ceremony would be held, when she heard the sharp sound of synchronized footsteps approaching. She looked up to see the 4 cadets forming a loose semicircle around her, their expressions serious and official-looking. "Ma'am," said, his voice carrying the crisp authority he'd been practicing for 4 years, "I'm going to need to see some identification. This is a restricted area, and civilian personnel are not permitted to wander unescorted." Sarah raised an eyebrow, her trained instincts immediately assessing the situation. She recognized the game they were playing. She'd seen it countless times during her years in the military. Young men, drunk on their own perceived power, trying to intimidate someone they assumed was helpless. What they didn't know was that Sarah Mitchell had faced down terrorists, pirates, and enemy combatants in some of the most hostile environments on Earth. "I'm sorry, officer," she said, playing along for the moment while deciding how to handle the situation. Her voice carried a slight edge that the cadets were too focused on their performance to notice. "I wasn't aware I needed an escort. I'm here for the graduation ceremony." David stepped forward, emboldened by what he interpreted as submission. "The ceremony doesn't start for 2 hours, ma'am. In the meantime, you'll need to come with us for processing. Standard security protocol." James couldn't resist adding his own flourish. "We'll need you to assume the position for a security search. Can't be too careful these days." The comment drew snickers from the group, and Sarah felt her jaw tighten slightly. She had dealt with enough genuine security threats and real military protocol to find their amateur theatrics both amusing and irritating. More importantly, their behavior was exactly the kind of unprofessional conduct that gave the military a bad name. "The position?" Sarah asked, her voice deceptively calm. "And what position would that be exactly?" Encouraged by what he thought was her compliance, gestured broadly. "Hands against the wall, feet spread apart. Standard procedure, ma'am, won't take but a minute." Nodded approvingly at his friend's performance. "That's right. We take security very seriously here. Can't have unauthorized personnel wandering around with potentially dangerous items." Sarah set down her purse slowly, buying herself time to think. She could handle this situation in several ways. The direct approach would be to simply identify herself and watch them scatter like startled rabbits. The diplomatic approach would be to ask them to contact their commanding officer. But there was a third option that appealed to the part of her that had been shaped by years of unconventional warfare and creative problem-solving. "I understand completely," she said, her tone becoming more cooperative. "Security is paramount, though I have to ask, are you actually authorized to conduct such searches? Because I'd hate for you to get in trouble with your superiors for overstepping your authority." The question caught them off guard for a moment. Recovered first, his confidence wavering slightly but his pride preventing him from backing down. "Ma'am, we're senior cadets. We have full authority to ensure the security of this facility." "Senior cadets," Sarah repeated thoughtfully. "How impressive. And I'm sure you've been thoroughly trained in proper search procedures, evidence handling, and constitutional law regarding unreasonable search and seizure." The legal terminology made David shift uncomfortably, but James stepped in with false bravado. "Lady, you're overthinking this. We're not lawyers, we're future military officers. Just cooperate and we'll have you on your way in no time." Sarah nodded slowly as if considering their words. "You know what? You're absolutely right. I should cooperate with proper authority figures, but first I'm curious about something. What's your chain of command here? Who would I speak to if I had concerns about how this situation is being handled?" His chest puffed out slightly. "You'd report to me first, then my company commander, then the battalion commander, and so on up the line. But trust me, ma'am, there won't be any need for that if you just cooperate." "Fascinating," Sarah said, genuinely interested in their response. "And tell me, in your military training, have you learned about the importance of positive identification before engaging a target?" The question puzzled them but laughed nervously. "Lady, you're not a target. You're just a civilian who wandered into the wrong place at the wrong time." "Am I?" Sarah asked, her voice taking on a different quality, still calm, but with an undertone that made the more perceptive members of the group start to feel uneasy. However, was too committed to his performance to notice the change. "Look, this has been fun, but we need to move this along. Either you cooperate with our security procedures, or we'll have to call the real authorities to deal with a non-compliant civilian." "The real authorities," Sarah repeated, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "That's interesting phrasing. So you're admitting that you're not actually real authorities." The logic trap caught them off guard, and for a moment none of them knew how to respond. David was the first to recover, trying to salvage the situation with aggressive posturing. "Look, lady, you can play word games all you want, but this is still a military installation, and we still outrank you by default. So why don't you just do what we're telling you to do?" Sarah's smile widened slightly. "Outrank me by default? That's a fascinating assumption. Tell me what makes you so certain of our relative ranks." The question hung in the air like a challenge, and the cadets exchanged uncertain glances. They had expected easy compliance or frightened resistance, not this calm cross-examination that was making them increasingly uncomfortable. Decided to reassert control through intimidation. "Ma'am, I don't think you understand the seriousness of your situation. You're on a military base without proper authorization, refusing to comply with security personnel. That could be considered a federal offense." "Could it?" Sarah asked, her eyebrows rising. "And you learned that in which class exactly? Military Law 101, Constitutional Studies, or Introduction to Federal Criminal Code?" The questions were delivered with such casual precision that the cadets began to realize they were dealing with someone far more knowledgeable than they had initially assumed. James, growing frustrated with the verbal sparring, decided to push things further. "Enough talking," he said, reaching toward Sarah's arm. "We're taking you to security now." The moment his hand made contact with her arm, Sarah's entire demeanor shifted. The change was subtle but unmistakable, like watching a house cat transform into a panther. Her posture straightened, her eyes became laser-focused, and an aura of controlled danger emanated from her that made all four cadets take an involuntary step backward. "I wouldn't recommend completing that action," Sarah said, her voice now carrying the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to life-and-death command decisions. "Remove your hand, now." James, startled by the transformation, jerked his hand back as if he'd been burned. The playful atmosphere evaporated instantly, replaced by a tension that none of the young men quite understood, but all of them felt. His leadership challenged and his pride wounded made the mistake of doubling down. "That's it. We're calling security. David, get on your radio and—" "Before you make that call," Sarah interrupted, her voice cutting through his words like a blade. "Let me save you some embarrassment. My name is Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell, United States Navy. I'm a SEAL Team 6 operator with 15 years of active service, including multiple combat deployments. I'm here for my brother's graduation, and I'm currently on authorized leave." The words hit the cadets like a physical blow. The color drained from his face, while David's mouth fell open in shock. James looked like he wanted to disappear into the ground, and his earlier confidence evaporated completely. "I believe," Sarah continued, her tone remaining conversationally pleasant while her eyes conveyed deadly seriousness, "that changes our relative positions somewhat. Don't you agree?" The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of their miscalculation. These young men, who moments before had felt so confident in their authority and power, now found themselves face to face with a warrior whose credentials and experience made their pretensions look like children playing dress-up. Tried to speak, his voice cracking slightly. "Ma'am, we weren't aware." "Of course you weren't aware," Sarah said, her tone gentle but firm. "Because you made assumptions. You saw a woman in civilian clothes and assumed she was powerless. You saw someone alone and assumed she was vulnerable. You confused your uniforms with authority and your numbers with strength." She looked at each of them in turn, her gaze making them feel exposed and foolish. "These are dangerous assumptions to make in the military. In the field, assumptions like these get people killed." David found his voice first, his training overcoming his embarrassment. "Commander, we apologize. We were just—" "Just what?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious to hear how they would explain their behavior. "Just harassing a civilian, just abusing your positions, just practicing the kind of behavior that undermines everything the uniform is supposed to represent." The questions stung because they were accurate. What had seemed like harmless fun moments before now looked like exactly what it was: abuse of power, harassment, and unprofessional conduct. His face red with shame stepped forward. "Ma'am, it was supposed to be a joke. We were just messing around. We never meant any real harm." Sarah nodded slowly, considering his words. "I understand that you thought it was harmless, but let me ask you something. If I had actually been a powerless civilian, would your behavior have been any less wrong? Would the fear and humiliation you were trying to cause have been acceptable just because you thought I couldn't fight back?" The question forced them to confront the true nature of their actions, and none of them liked what they saw. As their leader, felt the weight of responsibility most heavily. "No, ma'am," he said quietly. "It wouldn't have been acceptable." "Good," Sarah said, her tone softening slightly. "That's the beginning of wisdom, understanding that wrong behavior doesn't become right just because you think you can get away with it." She picked up her purse and straightened her clothes, preparing to leave. "Now, I have a graduation to attend, and you have some serious thinking to do about what kind of officers you want to become." As she began to walk away, James called after her. "Commander, are you going to report this?" Sarah paused and turned back to look at them. Four young men who had learned a hard lesson about assumptions, power, and consequences. They looked properly chastened, but she could see genuine remorse in their faces rather than just fear of punishment. "That depends," she said finally. "Are you going to learn from this experience? Are you going to become the kind of officers who protect the innocent rather than intimidate them? Are you going to remember that leadership is about service, not power?" Stepped forward, his voice steady despite his embarrassment. "Yes, ma'am, we will." Sarah studied him for a long moment, reading the sincerity in his expression. "Then consider this a training exercise rather than a disciplinary matter. But understand that if I ever hear of behavior like this again from any of you, there will be consequences. The Navy doesn't need officers who abuse their authority." "Understood, Commander," David said, speaking for all of them. Sarah nodded and turned to leave, but called out once more, "Commander, thank you for handling this the way you did." She looked back at them one final time, these young men who would soon be officers in the United States Navy. They had made a mistake, but they had the capacity to learn from it. That was something, at least. "Remember this feeling," she said. "Remember what it's like to discover you've misjudged a situation completely. In the field, that kind of mistake doesn't usually end with a lesson learned. It ends with people dead." With that sobering thought, she walked away, leaving the four cadets to contemplate their actions and their futures. Behind her, she could hear them beginning to discuss what had happened in hushed, serious tones. It was a start. As Sarah made her way toward the auditorium, she reflected on the encounter. It wasn't the first time she'd been underestimated because of her gender, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. But every such incident was an opportunity to educate, to challenge preconceptions, and to demonstrate that strength came in many forms. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky, promising a beautiful day for Jake's graduation. Sarah smiled, thinking about how proud she was of her brother and how much she was looking forward to celebrating his achievement. The encounter with the cadets was already fading into memory, just another minor skirmish in the ongoing battle against ignorance and prejudice. Little did she know that her day was far from over, and that her encounter with the four cadets was about to take an unexpected turn that would test not only their assumptions about her, but her own assumptions about them. The graduation ceremony was everything Sarah had hoped it would be. Watching Jake receive his commission as an ensign in the United States Navy filled her with a pride that was difficult to put into words. She had seen him grow from a scrawny teenager with big dreams into a young man ready to serve his country, and she couldn't have been more proud. After the ceremony, families and new officers mingled on the academy grounds, taking photos and sharing congratulations. Sarah was talking with Jake and their parents when she noticed a commotion near the main gate. Several black SUVs had arrived, and men in suits were speaking urgently with academy security personnel. Her trained instincts immediately went on alert. The vehicles, the coordinated movement, the serious expressions, all suggested some kind of security threat or emergency situation. She excused herself from her family and moved closer to observe, her years of experience having taught her to trust her gut when something felt wrong. As she approached, she overheard fragments of conversation between the suited men and academy officials. Words like credible threat, immediate evacuation, and terrorist cell made her blood run cold. Whatever was happening, it was serious. One of the men in suits, clearly the team leader based on how the others deferred to him, was speaking rapidly into a radio. "Command, this is Agent. We have confirmation of the threat. Intelligence indicates a possible attack on the graduation ceremony. We need immediate lockdown and evacuation procedures." Sarah's military training kicked in automatically. If there was a genuine threat to the hundreds of families and new officers currently celebrating on the grounds, time was critical. She approached Agent, identifying herself with the calm authority that came from years of high-stakes operations. "Agent, I'm Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, Navy SEALs. What's the situation?" The agent looked her up and down, taking in her civilian clothes with obvious skepticism. "Ma'am, I need you to move away from this area. We're dealing with a security situation." "I understand that," Sarah replied calmly. "I'm offering assistance. I have experience with threat assessment and crowd control in hostile situations." Another agent joined them, his expression dismissive. "Lady, unless you're FBI or Homeland Security, you need to step back and let us handle this." Sarah recognized the attitude immediately, the same assumption-based thinking that had gotten the cadets into trouble earlier. But this was a genuine emergency situation, and her pride was less important than the safety of everyone at the academy. "Agent," she said, pulling out her military ID. "Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell, SEAL Team 6. I've handled counterterrorism operations in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Somalia. If you have a credible threat here, you can use my expertise." Glanced at her ID, then back at her civilian appearance. His radio crackled with urgent updates, and she could see him weighing his options. "Commander, I appreciate the offer, but we have protocols. Civilian contractors aren't authorized for this type of operation." "I'm not a contractor," Sarah said firmly. "I'm active-duty Navy, currently on leave, and if you have families and new officers in danger, protocols take a backseat to saving lives." Before could respond, another voice cut through the discussion. "Commander Mitchell." Sarah turned to see Torres approaching, now in his dress uniform complete with officer's bars. Behind him came David, James, and all looking much more serious than they had that morning. "Ensign Torres," Sarah acknowledged, nodding his new rank. "Congratulations on your commission." Looked somewhat embarrassed but determined. "Commander, we couldn't help but notice the commotion. Is there something we can do to help?" Agent looked between Sarah and the new officers with growing confusion. "Do you people know each other?" "We met earlier," Sarah said diplomatically. "These officers might be useful in evacuation procedures. They know the layout of the facility better than anyone." Radio crackled again with urgent updates. Agent, we've identified the vehicle. Black van heading toward the main ceremony area, ETA 3 minutes. The urgency in the transmission made the decision for him, looked at Sarah with new respect. Commander, if you're willing to assist, we could use someone with your experience. What do you recommend? Sarah's mind immediately shifted into tactical mode, years of training and experience taking over. First, we need to know the exact nature of the threat. What intelligence do you have? Intercepted communications about a vehicle-borne explosive device targeting the ceremony, replied quickly. The van left a suspected safe house 20 minutes ago. Sarah nodded, processing the information rapidly. Range and payload of the device. Unknown, but we have to assume worst-case scenario. Understood. Sarah turned to the 4 new ensigns. You know this facility. What's the fastest way to evacuate the ceremony area without causing a panic? David stepped forward, his earlier nervousness replaced by professional focus. There are 3 main exits from the ceremonial plaza. The primary exit leads to the parking area, but that's where a vehicle would most likely target. Secondary exits? Sarah asked. James pointed toward the buildings. East and west sides lead to the academic buildings. The east side has a clear path to the secondary parking area. Sarah looked at Agent. How many agents do you have on site? 12 plus academy security. Not enough for a proper evacuation without panic, Sarah calculated quickly. We need to use the new officers. They have instant credibility with the families, and people will follow their instructions without question. Who had been quiet since their morning encounter, spoke up. Commander, most of our classmates are still in the area with their families. We could coordinate with them. Good thinking, Sarah approved. Can your team secure the perimeter while we manage the evacuation? Nodded, his initial skepticism about Sarah's involvement now completely gone. What do you need from us? Sarah's mind was working at full speed, drawing on years of experience in crisis management. Split your team. Half focuses on intercepting the vehicle before it reaches the target area. The other half helps coordinate the evacuation. We need to assume the vehicle will reach its target and plan accordingly. She turned back to the ensigns. I need you to spread out and find your classmates. The story is a security exercise, routine drill, nothing to worry about. Move people toward the east exit calmly but quickly. No running, no shouting. Can you do that? Nodded firmly. Yes, ma'am. What about the families who might not listen to us? That's where I come in, Sarah said. I'll work the crowd, identifying potential problems and helping where needed. The key is to keep everyone calm while moving them away from the primary target area. Radio crackled again. Agent, vehicle is 2 minutes out. We need that area clear now. You heard him, Sarah said to the group. Go, move fast but stay calm. Remember, people take their cues from you. If you look panicked, they'll panic. If you look confident and in control, they'll follow your lead. The 4 ensigns dispersed quickly, each heading toward different areas of the ceremony grounds. Sarah watched them for a moment, nodding how they had transformed from the overconfident young men she'd met that morning into focused professional officers. Crisis had a way of bringing out either the best or worst in people, and she was glad to see it was bringing out their best. She turned back to, I need a radio and an earpiece. I'll coordinate the evacuation while your people handle the vehicle. Handed her the equipment without hesitation. Channel 7 for ground coordination, Channel 9 for command updates. Sarah clipped the radio to her belt and fitted the earpiece, immediately feeling more connected to the operation. Around her, she could see the evacuation beginning as the new ensigns started approaching groups of families with calm, authoritative instructions. She watched approach a large group of older couples, clearly parents and grandparents of graduates. His demeanor was perfect, confident but not alarming, official but not threatening. Ladies, and we're conducting a routine security exercise. For everyone's safety, we need to move toward the academic buildings. Please follow me. The response was exactly what Sarah had hoped for. The families, seeing an officer in uniform giving clear instructions, began moving without question or panic. It was a textbook example of how authority could be used properly, to protect and serve rather than intimidate. David was having similar success with a group of younger siblings and friends. His explanation was brief and reassuring, and people began moving toward the designated exit points in an orderly fashion. Sarah moved through the crowd herself, watching for signs of resistance or panic. Her trained eye caught problems before they developed: a grandmother who was moving too slowly, a child who had become separated from his parents, a group of teenagers who seemed inclined to ignore the instructions and stay put. She approached the teenagers with a friendly but firm demeanor. "Folks, we need everyone to move toward the buildings now. It's just a precaution, but it's important." One of the teenagers, a young man who clearly thought he knew better, crossed his arms defiantly. "This is stupid. We're not going anywhere. What's really going on?" Sarah smiled, recognizing the challenge. What's going on is that smart people follow the instructions of trained professionals during security situations. Are you smart people? The simple question, delivered without threat but with unmistakable authority, deflated their resistance immediately. The group began moving toward the exit without further argument. His voice crackled through her earpiece. "Commander, vehicle is 1 minute out. How's the evacuation proceeding?" Sarah keyed her radio while continuing to scan the crowd. "Approximately 60% evacuated. The new officers are doing an excellent job. We need another 2 minutes for complete clearance." "We may not have 2 minutes." Sarah's jaw tightened. "Then we work with what we have. Where's your intercept team?" "Positioning now. If they miss the vehicle, it'll be in the plaza in 30 seconds. Sarah's training kicked into high gear. 30 seconds to clear several hundred people from a potential blast zone was impossible through normal evacuation procedures. She needed to think outside the box. She keyed her radio to the frequency the ensigns were using. "All evacuating officers, this is Commander Mitchell. We need to accelerate the timeline. New protocol, direct everyone to get down on the ground immediately. Spread the word now." The response was immediate and professional. Across the ceremony area, she could hear the new officers switching their instructions from "move calmly" to "everyone down now." The change in urgency was unmistakable, but the families responded well to the clear, authoritative commands. Parents pulled children down with them, elderly attendees were helped to the ground by those nearby, and within seconds, the entire remaining crowd was low to the ground. Sarah dropped to a crouch herself, her eyes still scanning for anyone who might not have heard the instructions. Through her earpiece, she could hear team coordinating their intercept attempt. Target vehicle spotted, black van approaching the main gate at high speed. Intercept team in position. Taking the shot in 3, 2, 1. The sound of gunfire echoed across the academy grounds, followed by the screech of brakes and the crash of metal. Sarah's earpiece crackled with urgent updates. Vehicle stopped, driver down, checking for explosives. Bomb squad en route. Area secure. Vehicle contained explosive device but did not detonate. Sarah felt the tension drain from her shoulders as the immediate threat passed. Around her, families were beginning to look up from the ground, confusion and fear evident on their faces. She stood and keyed her radio. "All officers, threat is neutralized. Begin post-incident procedures. Keep everyone calm and start explaining what happened." His voice came back immediately. "Understood, Commander. What should we tell them?" Sarah considered the question carefully. The truth, within reason, there was a credible security threat that has been neutralized. Everyone is safe. The authorities handled the situation professionally. Thank them for their cooperation. As the immediate crisis passed, Sarah watched the 4 ensigns manage the aftermath with impressive skill. They moved through the crowd, offering reassurance, answering questions, and helping people to their feet. Their earlier transformation from overconfident cadets to professional officers was now complete. Agent approached her, his expression one of genuine respect and gratitude. "Commander, I owe you an apology. When you first approached me, I should have listened to your credentials instead of making assumptions based on your appearance." Sarah smiled wryly. "Seems to be a common problem today, but you adapted when it mattered, and that's what counts." "Your coordination of the evacuation was textbook perfect," continued. "Those young officers you worked with, they were impressive under pressure." Sarah looked across the grounds at David, James, and as they continued their post-incident duties. "They surprised me too," she admitted. "Sometimes people rise to meet the expectations placed on them." As families began to reunite and the immediate crisis response wound down, Sarah reflected on the day's events. She had started the morning expecting a simple graduation ceremony, and instead found herself managing a terrorist threat alongside 4 young men who had attempted to intimidate her just hours earlier. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same cadets who had tried to abuse their authority that morning had, when faced with a real crisis, demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership and professionalism the military was supposed to foster. It was a reminder that people were complex, capable of both failure and growth, often within the same day. Jake found her as the crowds began to disperse, his face a mixture of worry and pride. "Sarah, I heard you helped coordinate the evacuation. Are you okay?" She hugged her brother tightly, feeling the weight of the day's events. "I'm fine, Jake. Just another day at the office, in a way." "I heard you worked with some of my classmates," Jake said, glancing toward Ware and his friends were still helping with the cleanup. "They were talking about how professional you were, how much they learned from watching you work." Sarah followed his gaze to the 4 ensigns, caught her eye and nodded respectfully, a gesture she returned. "We all learned something today," she said quietly. As the sun began to set over the Naval Academy, Sarah realized that sometimes the most important lessons came not from textbooks or training exercises, but from unexpected encounters that challenged assumptions and forced people to rise above their limitations. Today had been full of such lessons, for everyone involved. 3 months after the graduation incident, Sarah was back in her element, leading a team of Navy SEALs through a complex training exercise in the mountains of California. The morning mist clung to the valleys as her team moved silently through the forest, practicing the infiltration techniques that could mean the difference between mission success and failure in the field. Her radio crackled softly in her ear. "Commander Mitchell, this is base. We need you to return to headquarters immediately. High-priority tasking from SOCOM." Sarah frowned, checking her watch. They were in the middle of a crucial phase of the training exercise, and interrupting it would set her team back significantly. "Base, can this wait 2 hours? We're in the middle of." "Negative, Commander. This is coming down from the Pentagon. You need to be here in 30 minutes. The urgency in the communication officer's voice told Sarah this wasn't a routine assignment. She signaled to her team leader, Chief Petty Officer, to take over the exercise and began making her way back through the forest toward the vehicles. 30 minutes later, she was sitting in the briefing room at Naval Special Warfare Command, still in her field gear and wondering what could be so urgent that it required pulling her from active training. Admiral Harrison, the commanding officer, entered with a file in his hands and a grim expression on his face. "Commander, we have a situation developing that requires immediate attention," he began without preamble. 48 hours ago, a commercial cargo ship, the MV Pacific Dawn, was hijacked approximately 200 miles off the coast of Somalia. The ship was carrying humanitarian supplies to East Africa when it was seized by armed pirates. Sarah nodded, not surprised by the location or nature of the threat. Somali piracy had been a persistent problem in the region for years, though recent international efforts had reduced the frequency of such incidents. "The ship is carrying medical supplies, food, and educational materials donated by various international relief organizations," the admiral continued. "But more importantly for our purposes, there are 12 hostages aboard, the ship's crew, consisting of 8 Americans, 2 British nationals, and 2 Filipino sailors." "What's the pirates' demand?" Sarah asked. $10 million in ransom, to be delivered within 72 hours. They've threatened to execute the hostages if their demands aren't met. Admiral Harrison opened the file and slid several photographs across the table. "But there's another complication. Intelligence suggests this isn't an ordinary piracy operation." Sarah studied the photos, satellite imagery of the hijacked vessel, intelligence briefings on known pirate groups in the region, and profiles of the ship's crew. "What kind of complication?" "The pirates appear to be working with elements of AL, the terrorist organization that's been operating in Somalia and the broader East Africa region. Intelligence indicates they may be planning to use the humanitarian supplies as propaganda tools while using the ransom money to fund terrorist operations." The implications hit Sarah immediately. What appeared to be a straightforward piracy-for-profit operation was actually something much more dangerous, a terrorist financing scheme that could fund attacks across the region. "The political situation makes a direct military response complicated," Admiral Harrison continued. "The Somali government is officially cooperating, but their control over the coastal regions is limited. The international community is pressuring for a negotiated resolution, but State Department analysis suggests the terrorists have no intention of honoring any agreements. Sarah was already thinking tactically. What assets do we have in the region? The USS Hamilton, a guided missile destroyer, is 12 hours out. They'll provide fire support and coordination. We also have intelligence assets monitoring the situation and can provide real-time updates on pirate movements and defensive positions. And the rescue operation. Admiral Harrison leaned back in his chair. That's where you come in, Commander. We're putting together a joint task force for a hostage rescue operation. The mission will require infiltration by sea, neutralization of the pirate threat, and extraction of the hostages with minimal casualties. Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with high-stakes missions. This was what she had trained for her entire career, complex operations where failure meant innocent people died. Timeline, she asked. You have 18 hours to plan and execute. The pirates have given us 72 hours, but intelligence suggests they may not wait that long if they feel pressured. Team composition. That's your call, Commander. You can choose from any available SEAL personnel. We're also assigning you a liaison officer who has recent experience in the region and knowledge of local pirate tactics. The Admiral pressed his intercom. Send in Ensign Torres. Sarah's eyebrows rose in surprise as Torres entered the briefing room, now wearing the working uniform of a naval officer rather than the dress uniform she'd seen at graduation. He looked more mature and confident than he had 3 months earlier, and she could see the changes that real military service had already begun to make in him. Ensign Torres, Admiral Harrison said, you'll be working with Commander Mitchell on this operation. Your recent intelligence training and familiarity with East African maritime security makes you valuable to this mission. Came to attention. Yes, sir. He glanced at Sarah with what she read as both recognition and respect. Commander Mitchell. Ensign, Sarah acknowledged. I hear you've been assigned to intelligence analysis. Yes, ma'am. I've been working with the Maritime Security Task Force, analyzing pirate tactics and movement patterns in the Indian Ocean. Admiral Harrison stood to leave. I'll let you two get started on mission planning. Commander, you have full authority to requisition any resources you need. This operation has the highest priority. After the Admiral left, Sarah and found themselves alone in the briefing room, surrounded by maps, intelligence reports, and tactical planning materials. The atmosphere was professional, but Sarah could sense nervousness about working with her given their previous encounter. Ensign, she said, breaking the tension, let's focus on the mission. Your personal feelings about our previous meeting are irrelevant to saving those hostages. Straightened, yes, ma'am, I understand. Good, now walk me through the intelligence picture. What do we know about the pirates' capabilities and defensive positions? Opened his laptop and began displaying satellite imagery on the briefing room's main screen. The vessel is currently anchored approximately 15 miles off the Somali coast, near the town of. This is a known pirate stronghold with several natural harbors that provide protection from rough seas. Sarah studied the imagery carefully. Security around the ship. 2 smaller boats providing perimeter security, possibly armed with RPGs and automatic weapons. Intelligence suggests there are between 12 and 15 pirates aboard the main vessel, armed with AK-47s and at least 1 heavy machine gun. Hostage location. Switch to a deck plan of the cargo ship. Based on communications intercepts and thermal imaging, we believe the hostages are being held in the ship's mess hall, here on the main deck. The pirates appear to have established their command center on the bridge. Sarah nodded, her mind already working through possible approach vectors and tactical options. What about local support? Are there friendly forces in the area? The Somali Coast Guard has a small presence in the region, but they're not equipped for this type of operation. The European Union Naval Force has offered assistance, but they're operating under rules of engagement that limit their ability to take direct action. So we're essentially on our own, Sarah concluded. Which is fine. SEAL teams work better without too many outside variables anyway. She began sketching out preliminary assault plans on a whiteboard, drawing approach routes and marking key tactical positions. The challenge is going to be getting close enough to the ship without being detected. If the pirates realize they're under attack before we can neutralize the perimeter security, they could execute the hostages. Studied her preliminary plans with obvious interest. Commander, what if we use the humanitarian angle as a deception? Sarah paused in her sketching. Explain. The pirates are expecting someone to attempt delivery of the ransom. What if we approached in a vessel that looked like it was carrying the payoff? Get close enough to deploy swimmers without raising suspicion. Sarah considered the idea. It had merit, but there were significant risks. The problem with deception operations is that they depend on the enemy behaving predictably. If the pirates decide to search our vessel or demand proof of the ransom before letting us approach, the operation could collapse quickly. True, agreed. But it might give us the element of surprise we need to get within striking distance. Sarah found herself impressed by his tactical thinking. The young officer who had tried to intimidate civilians 3 months earlier was demonstrating real analytical skills and creative problem-solving abilities. It's worth considering as one option, she said. But we need alternatives. What other intelligence do we have about their operational patterns? Pulled up more files on his laptop. Communications intercepts suggest the pirates are under pressure from their terrorist associates to conclude the operation quickly. There's been discussion about moving the hostages to shore if the ransom isn't delivered soon. That would significantly complicate any rescue operation, Sarah noted. Once the hostages are on land in hostile territory, extraction becomes much more difficult. Exactly, which is why I think time is more critical than the 72-hour deadline suggests. Sarah stepped back from the whiteboard and studied her preliminary plans. The mission was complex, with multiple variables and significant risks. But that was nothing new. Every SEAL operation involved risk, and the successful ones were those where the team had planned for every contingency they could think of and remained flexible enough to adapt when the unexpected happened. Ensign, I want you to pull together detailed intelligence on everything we can expect to encounter. Weather conditions, sea state, known pirate weapons and tactics, layout of the ship, background on the hostages, and anything else that might be relevant. Yes, ma'am. How large a team are you planning to use? Sarah considered the question carefully. Too small a team might lack the firepower and flexibility needed for a complex operation. Too large a team would be harder to deploy covertly and coordinate effectively. 8 operators total, she decided. 4 two-man teams with specific responsibilities: perimeter security elimination, bridge assault, hostage extraction, and command and control. We'll also need support personnel for communications and medical. Was taking notes rapidly. What about insertion method? Multiple options, Sarah replied. We could use a submarine for covert deployment, helicopters for fast assault, or small boats for a surface approach. Each has advantages and risks. The submarine option would provide the most surprise, observed. But it would also take longer to get the team in position. Correct, and time is working against us. The longer this operation takes to develop, the more likely something goes wrong. Sarah's radio beeped with an incoming message. She listened to the brief transmission, then looked at with a grim expression. Change of plans, Ensign. Intelligence just intercepted communications between the pirates and their terrorist contacts. They're planning to execute 1 hostage in 6 hours as a demonstration of their seriousness. The timeline had just compressed dramatically. Instead of 18 hours to plan and execute, they now had 6 hours before an innocent person died. Commander said, his voice steady despite the pressure, what do you need me to do? Sarah felt a surge of respect for the young officer. Under pressure, he was focused on the mission rather than his own concerns or limitations. Get me Captain on the phone. I need to start assembling the team immediately. Then pull together all available intelligence on the fastest possible insertion methods. Yes, ma'am. As began making calls and pulling files, Sarah stared at the tactical plans on the whiteboard. 6 hours to plan, deploy, and execute a complex hostage rescue operation against well-armed pirates operating from a defensive position in hostile waters. It was exactly the kind of impossible mission that SEALs lived for. She picked up a red marker and wrote T6 hours at the top of the whiteboard. Then she began modifying her plans, cutting out anything non-essential and focusing on the core elements needed to save lives. Time was now the enemy as much as the pirates were, and every minute spent in planning was a minute less available for execution. "Ensign," she called to, who was coordinating with intelligence personnel over his radio. "I need those weather reports and sea state analysis in 10 minutes, and find out what assets the Hamilton can provide for fire support." "On it, Commander." Sarah felt the familiar calm focus that came with high-stakes operations settle over her. The mission was dangerous, the timeline was compressed, and the consequences of failure were measured in human lives. But this was what she had spent 15 years training for, the moment when all her skills, experience, and judgment would be tested against impossible odds. The planning phase was about to get very intense, very quickly. 4 hours later, Sarah found herself aboard the USS Hamilton, watching the final preparations for one of the most challenging missions of her career. The destroyer's deck was a controlled chaos of activity as SEAL team members checked equipment, studied intelligence reports, and made final adjustments to their gear. The plan they had developed was necessarily simple given the compressed timeline, but it was also elegant in its directness. 2 Zodiac boats would approach the hijacked cargo ship from different angles under cover of darkness, with Sarah's team focusing on hostage extraction while Chief's team handled perimeter security and the bridge assault. Had proven invaluable during the planning phase, his intelligence analysis providing crucial details about the pirates' capabilities and routines. More importantly, he had demonstrated the kind of calm professionalism under pressure that marked the difference between good officers and great ones. "Commander," approached her as she was reviewing the final mission brief. "Latest intelligence update from the Hamilton's communications team." Sarah looked up from the tactical map spread across a folding table. "What do we have?" "Communications intercepts suggest the pirates are getting nervous. There's been increased radio chatter with their contacts on shore, and thermal imaging shows unusual movement around the hostage location." Sarah's jaw tightened. Nervous pirates were dangerous pirates, more likely to make mistakes, but also more likely to hurt hostages. Any indication they're planning to execute someone ahead of schedule? "Nothing definitive, but the increased activity could be preparation for something. The thermal signatures suggest they've moved at least 2 hostages to a different location." Sarah studied the updated intelligence reports handed her. The mission was already complex, and now they had to deal with the possibility that the hostages had been separated or relocated within the ship. "Chief," she called to her team leader, who was supervising weapons checks nearby. "We need to adjust for possible hostage dispersal. The pirates may have split them up." Approached, his weathered face showing the concentration of a professional warrior preparing for combat. "How do you want to handle it, Commander?" "We stick with the primary plan, but we add a search and clear component. Once we secure the main hostage location, we systematically clear the rest of the ship until we account for everyone." "That's going to add time and risk," observed. "If they're spread throughout the ship, it could turn into a running gunfight." Sarah nodded grimly. "I know, but we can't leave anyone behind. We'll just have to be faster and more aggressive than they expect." Had been listening to their discussion, and Sarah could see him working through the tactical implications. "Commander, what if we used a distraction to draw the pirates' attention while the teams deployed?" "What kind of distraction?" "The Hamilton could conduct a communications probe, official-sounding radio calls claiming to be delivering the ransom. If the pirates think the money is actually arriving, they might consolidate their forces to receive it, potentially bringing the scattered hostages back together." Raised an eyebrow. "That's actually not bad, Ensign. It could give us a window to get aboard while they're focused on the supposed ransom delivery." Sarah considered the idea. It was exactly the kind of creative thinking that could make the difference between mission success and failure. The timing would have to be perfect. We'd need the distraction to hold their attention long enough for both teams to get into position. "How long would you need?" asked. "Minimum 15 minutes from boat launch to being in position for assault. Longer if we run into unexpected security measures." Nodded, making notes. "I can coordinate with the Hamilton's communications officer to develop a believable script, make it sound like nervous money men trying to arrange the handover." "Do it," Sarah decided. "But remember, once we start this deception, we're committed. If the pirates see through it before we're ready, they'll know we're coming." The next hour passed in a blur of final preparations. Weapons were loaded and checked multiple times. Communications equipment was tested and retested, and every team member reviewed their specific responsibilities until they could execute them in their sleep. Sarah found herself impressed by how seamlessly he had integrated into the operational team despite his relative inexperience. He was asking the right questions, making valuable contributions to the planning, and maintaining his composure under the intense pressure of a ticking clock. "Ensign," she said as they prepared to board the Zodiac boats, "you've done excellent work tonight. This operation is significantly better planned because of your contributions." Looked genuinely surprised by the praise. "Thank you, Commander. I'm just trying to apply what I learned in training." "Training is important," Sarah replied, "but what you're demonstrating tonight is judgment under pressure. That can't be taught, it has to be developed through experience." As they prepared to launch the boats, Admiral Harrison's voice crackled through the radio from the Hamilton's command center. "Commander Mitchell, you are authorized to proceed. Latest intelligence suggests the deadline for hostage execution has been moved up. You now have less than 2 hours before they carry out their threat." Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with the final moments before a mission began. All the planning, all the preparation, all the equipment checks, everything now came down to execution under combat conditions. "Roger that, Admiral. We're launching now." The Zodiac boats slipped away from the Hamilton's hull into the darkness of the Indian Ocean. The water was choppy but manageable, and the nearly new moon provided the kind of darkness that SEAL teams preferred for covert operations. Sarah's boat carried 4 operators plus, who would coordinate communications and intelligence updates during the approach. His boat carried the remaining 4 team members who would handle the more direct assault elements of the mission. As they moved through the water toward the hijacked cargo ship, Sarah used her night vision equipment to study their target. The MV Pacific Dawn was lit up like a small city, with lights visible on multiple decks and what appeared to be armed sentries moving around the superstructure. "Commander," his voice was quiet but clear through her earpiece. "Thermal imaging from the Hamilton shows at least 3 guards on deck, plus what looks like a machine gun position on the bridge wing." "Understood. Any sign of the perimeter boats?" 2 small craft, one off the starboard bow and one off the port quarter. They appear to be maintaining station rather than patrolling." Sarah adjusted her approach vector slightly to take advantage of the enemy boat's static positions. If the pirate guards were staying in fixed positions rather than actively patrolling, it would make the SEAL team's job significantly easier. "All teams, this is Commander Mitchell. We are 15 minutes out from the target. Commence communications deception in 5 minutes." The Hamilton's radio operator, following script, began attempting to contact the pirates with increasingly urgent requests for instructions about the ransom delivery. The transmissions were designed to sound like nervous civilians trying to arrange a dangerous money transfer in hostile waters. Pacific Dawn, this is the vessel Prosperity. We are carrying your requested cargo and need instructions for delivery. Please respond." Through her earpiece, Sarah could hear the pirates responding with growing excitement. The deception was working. They believed the ransom was actually being delivered. "Prosperity, this is Pacific Dawn. Approach from the east side slowly. Any aggressive action and the hostages die." Sarah smiled grimly. The pirates were focusing their attention on the supposed ransom delivery, which meant they were looking in the wrong direction as the SEAL teams approached from the west. 10 minutes out," she reported quietly. "All teams prepare for insertion." The Zodiac boats were running silent now, with their engines barely audible above the sound of waves against the cargo ship's hull. Through her night vision equipment, Sarah could see the details of their target becoming clearer: rusted deck equipment, cargo containers, and the dark windows of the superstructure where the hostages were presumably being held. "Commander," his voice was tense but controlled. "Intelligence update from Hamilton. They're tracking increased radio chatter between the ship and contacts on shore. The pirates may be getting suspicious about the ransom delivery." Sarah felt a chill of concern. If the pirates figured out the deception before the teams were in position, the mission could turn into a disaster. "How much more time do you think we have?" "Unknown, but I'd estimate less than 10 minutes before they start asking questions we can't answer." "Understood. All teams prepare for accelerated timeline. We may have to execute while conditions are less than ideal." The boats were now close enough to the cargo ship that Sarah could hear voices from the deck above. Pirates were moving around, apparently preparing to receive the supposed ransom delivery. It was both an opportunity and a danger. More pirates on deck meant more targets to neutralize, but it also meant more eyes that might spot the approaching SEAL teams. 5 minutes out's voice came through the tactical frequency. Bridge assault team ready. Hostage extraction team ready, Sarah replied. Ensign Torres, maintain communications with Hamilton. We need real-time intelligence updates once we're aboard. Yes, ma'am. Hamilton is tracking everything and will provide overwatch. The final minutes of the approach seemed to last forever and pass in an instant simultaneously. Sarah's team prepared their climbing equipment, whilst team moved toward their own insertion point. The success of the mission now depended on precise timing and flawless execution. All teams stand by for insertion, Sarah whispered into her radio. Execute in 60 seconds. The Zodiac boats moved into their final positions as Sarah and her team prepared to climb aboard the hijacked vessel. Above them, the pirates continued their preparations for the fake ransom delivery, unaware that 8 Navy SEALs were about to turn their hostage situation into their worst nightmare. 30 seconds, Sarah announced, checking her weapon one final time. Through her earpiece, she could hear the Hamilton's radio operator maintaining the deception, asking increasingly detailed questions about the ransom handover procedures. The pirates were responding with obvious anticipation, their attention completely focused on the prospect of $10 million. All teams, execute, execute, execute. Sarah and her team went up the side of the cargo ship like silent shadows, their years of training and experience allowing them to climb the rusty hull without making a sound. Within seconds, they were aboard the hijacked vessel and moving toward their objectives. The real mission was just beginning. The deck of the MV Pacific Dawn was a maze of shadows and steel, with cargo containers creating narrow corridors that could hide either hostages or hostile forces. Sarah moved through the darkness with her team, their night vision equipment turning the chaotic deck into a green-tinted landscape of tactical opportunities and dangers. Through her earpiece, she could hear coordinating with the Hamilton while monitoring pirate communications. His voice was steady and professional, providing crucial intelligence updates that kept the teams informed about enemy movements and positions. Commander, thermal imaging shows 4 hostages in the main mess hall as expected, but there are also heat signatures in the forward berthing area that could be additional hostages or guards. Sarah processed the information quickly while leading her team toward the superstructure. The mission was already more complex than they had hoped, with hostages potentially scattered throughout the ship rather than consolidated in one location. Do you copy the intelligence update? She whispered into her radio. Copy, bridge assault team is in position. I can see 3 pirates on the bridge, and they're definitely focused on the fake ransom delivery. We should have complete surprise. Good, execute bridge assault in 60 seconds. Hostage extraction team moving to primary location now. Sarah's team reached the entrance to the ship's superstructure without encountering resistance. The pirates' attention was completely focused on the supposed ransom delivery, exactly as had predicted. She could hear voices from above as the pirates discussed their plans for receiving the $10 million they thought was coming. Her team stacked up at the entrance to the mess hall where intelligence indicated the primary group of hostages was being held. Through the partially open door, she could see armed pirates inside, their weapons casual but ready. More importantly, she could see several figures sitting on the floor with their hands bound, the hostages they had come to rescue. Hostage extraction team in position, she reported quietly. I count 2 guards inside with 4 hostages, preparing for entry. Bridge assault team ready, responded. On your signal. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the familiar calm that came over her in the moments before combat. Everything they had trained for, planned for, and prepared for came down to the next few seconds. She looked at her team members, seeing the same focused determination in their eyes that had carried them through countless operations. All teams execute in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The coordinated assault began with simultaneous breaches on multiple levels of the ship. Sarah's team burst through the mess hall entrance with overwhelming speed and violence, their weapons trained on the pirate guards before the enemy could react. Down, down, everybody down. Sarah shouted, using her voice as both a weapon and a tool to distinguish between hostages and threats. The two pirate guards were neutralized within seconds, their weapons taken before they could fire a shot. The hostages, initially terrified by the sudden violence, quickly realized they were being rescued as Sarah's team began cutting their bonds. "You're safe now," Sarah told them calmly while her team secured the area. "We're United States Navy. We're here to get you out." Through her earpiece, she could hear team executing their assault on the bridge with similar efficiency. The sound of suppressed gunfire and shouted commands indicated that the bridge was being secured, cutting off the pirates' ability to coordinate their defense. But even as the primary objectives were being secured, his voice crackled through the radio with concerning intelligence. "Commander, thermal imaging shows multiple heat signatures moving throughout the ship. The pirates are responding to the assault, and it looks like there may be more hostages in the forward section." Sarah's jaw tightened as she processed the information. The mission was succeeding, but it was also revealing the true complexity of the situation. The pirates had been more prepared and better organized than intelligence had indicated. Bridge status. Bridge secured. 3 pirates neutralized, no casualties to our team. We have control of ship communications and navigation. Good. Can you hold position while hostage extraction team clears the forward section? Affirmative. We'll maintain overwatch from here. Sarah looked at the 4 rescued hostages, 3 men and 1 woman, all looking shaken but uninjured. They were crew members from the ship, and their relief at being rescued was obvious despite their traumatic experience. "Is this everyone?" Sarah asked them. "Are there other crew members somewhere else on the ship?" One of the men, apparently the ship's captain based on his uniform, shook his head grimly. "The pirates separated us yesterday. There are 4 more crew members being held in the forward berthing compartment. The pirates said they were keeping us apart in case anyone tried to rescue us." Sarah felt a surge of anger at the pirates' cruelty, but she channeled it into focused determination. "We'll get them. Stay here with Petty Officer Jackson. Don't move until we come back for you." She turned to the rest of her team. "We're going forward. I need continuous updates on pirate positions and any other intelligence Hamilton can provide." "Roger that, Commander. Current thermal imaging shows at least 6 heat signatures in the forward section, but it's difficult to distinguish between hostages and pirates from this distance." Sarah led her reduced team through the ship's narrow passageways, moving toward the forward berthing area where the remaining hostages were reportedly being held. The ship's interior was a labyrinth of corridors, stairways, and compartments that could hide enemy forces at every turn. As they moved forward, the sound of gunfire echoed from somewhere ahead of them. Not the controlled, professional shooting of her SEAL team, but the wild, automatic fire of panicked pirates who were shooting at shadows. "Commander," his voice was urgent in her earpiece, "the pirates are trying to reach the forward hostage location. I'm tracking 3 individuals moving through the ship's interior passageways, heading in your direction." Sarah held up her hand, stopping her team in a defensive position. The narrow corridors of the ship could work to their advantage, channeling any attacking pirates into killing zones where the superior training and equipment of the SEAL team would be decisive. "Positions," she whispered to her team. "We let them come to us." The next few minutes passed in tense silence as Sarah's team waited for the approaching pirates. Through the ship's hull, they could hear the continuing deception as the Hamilton's radio operator maintained the fiction of the ransom delivery, keeping any remaining pirates on deck focused on the wrong threat. The sound of footsteps in the corridor ahead announced the arrival of the pirates Sarah's team had been waiting for. Through her night vision equipment, she could see 3 armed men moving cautiously through the ship's passageways, their weapons ready, but their movements revealing their lack of professional military training. Sarah made a series of hand signals to her team, coordinating their response. The pirates were walking into a carefully prepared ambush, and they would never know what hit them. The engagement was over in less than 30 seconds. 3 pirates neutralized, no shots fired by the enemy, no casualties to the SEAL team. The superior training, equipment, and tactics of the Navy SEALs made the outcome inevitable once the pirates were isolated from their defensive positions. "Forward section clear," Sarah reported. "Moving to hostage location now." The berthing compartment where the remaining 4 hostages were being held was locked from the outside. indicating that the pirates had simply trapped the crew members inside rather than posting guards. Sarah's team breached the door to find 4 terrified but unharmed sailors who had spent the last 2 days wondering if they would ever see home again. United States Navy, Sarah announced as her team cut their bonds. You're safe now, we're getting you out of here. The relief on their faces was immediate and overwhelming. One of them, a young woman who couldn't have been more than 25, began crying as the reality of rescue sank in. Another, an older man with graying hair, simply kept repeating, thank God, over and over. Commander's voice came through the radio from the bridge. We have a problem. Intelligence from Hamilton indicates there are additional pirate boats approaching from shore. ETA approximately 15 minutes. Sarah felt the familiar pressure of a mission timeline compressing under enemy action. They had successfully rescued the hostages and secured the ship, but now they had to extract everyone before reinforcements arrived. All teams, prepare for immediate extraction. We need to get the hostages off this ship and back to the Hamilton before those boats arrive. As her team began moving the rescued hostages toward the extraction point, his voice provided crucial coordination. Commander, Hamilton is positioning to provide fire support if needed. They're also preparing to receive the hostages for immediate medical evaluation. The extraction phase of the mission proved to be just as challenging as the assault. Moving 12 rescued hostages plus the SEAL teams to the extraction boats, while maintaining security, was a complex logistical challenge made more difficult by the approaching pirate reinforcements. But as they reached the deck where the Zodiac boats were waiting, Sarah felt the satisfaction that came with mission success. 12 innocent people who had been facing execution were now safe and heading home to their families. All hostages accounted for, she reported to Admiral Harrison as the boats pulled away from the cargo ship. Mission successful, no casualties to friendlies. Through the darkness behind them, the MV Pacific Dawn sat empty, except for the neutralized pirates and the humanitarian supplies that had originally been its cargo. The ship would be recovered by international maritime authorities and eventually continue its mission of delivering aid to those who needed it. As the boats approached the USS Hamilton, Sarah found herself reflecting on the mission and the people who had made it successful. Torres, the same young man who had tried to intimidate her at the Naval Academy 3 months earlier, had proven himself to be a capable and professional officer under the most demanding circumstances possible. Ensign Torres, she said as they prepared to board the Hamilton, outstanding work tonight. Your intelligence analysis and coordination were crucial to the mission's success. Looked genuinely moved by her words. Thank you, Commander. It was an honor to work with you and your team. Sarah studied his face in the dim light of the ship's deck illumination. The overconfident cadet who had made assumptions about her capabilities was gone, replaced by a mature officer who had learned to judge people by their actions rather than their appearance. You know, Ensign, when we first met, you made some assumptions about me based on what you saw rather than what I was actually capable of. Nodded, his expression serious. Yes, ma'am, I learned a valuable lesson that day about the danger of preconceptions. And tonight, Sarah continued, I almost made the same mistake about you. When I saw you in that briefing room, I remembered the young man who tried to harass a civilian rather than seeing the officer you've become. She extended her hand to him. Sometimes people surprise us, Ensign. Tonight you surprised me in the best possible way. As they shook hands, Sarah realized that both of them had learned important lessons about judgment, growth, and the capacity for people to exceed expectations when given the opportunity. The rescued hostages were already being helped aboard the Hamilton by medical personnel, their ordeal finally over. Somewhere in the darkness of the Indian Ocean, pirate reinforcement boats were discovering that their colleagues and their prize had vanished without a trace. And on the deck of a United States Navy destroyer, a SEAL commander and a young intelligence officer were completing a mission that had started with assumptions and ended with mutual respect earned through shared danger and successful teamwork. Admiral Harrison met them at the gangway, his face showing both relief and pride. Outstanding work, Commander Mitchell. All hostages recovered, all team members accounted for, and the terrorist financing operation has been disrupted. As Sarah made her way to the debriefing room, she reflected on the day's events. The mission had been a success by any measure. But more importantly, it had demonstrated the power of teamwork, professionalism, and the ability to look past first impressions to see people's true potential. In the military, as in life, the most important lessons often came not from textbooks or training manuals, but from real experiences that tested character under pressure. Today had been one of those experiences for everyone involved. The debriefing would document the tactical lessons learned and the intelligence gathered. But the personal lessons, about judgment, growth, and the capacity for people to surprise us, would last much longer and prove equally valuable in future challenges. As the USS Hamilton turned toward home, carrying 12 rescued hostages and a successful SEAL team, Sarah Mitchell allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The woman who had been mistaken for a helpless civilian had once again proven that appearances could be deceiving, and that the most dangerous assumptions were the ones that underestimated the capabilities of others. The mission was complete, but the memories and lessons would endure.